Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin, and I'm joined once again with Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs TV. And we are coming to you on June the 5th, 2026. And Jeff, this week has been kind of a big week if for all those of us who follow the spring legislative session. The end of the session is a little bit like exams week in college. It's when so much of the work gets done, and done at the last minute. The state passed. Actually, on June the 1st, they were supposed to complete it by the end of May, but they passed the state budget at around 4 a.m., so technically they went over. But either way, now the state has a $55.9 billion budget. Before we get into some of the comments of the governor and the Republicans, what are your thoughts that you have had, if any, at this point?
Well, it was a gigantic waste of time. They really didn't even do what the Democrats were thinking of doing, let alone what you and I might suggest would be useful for them to do. They didn't do anything in terms of resolving whether the Bears are going to be staying in Chicago, playing in Chicago, or in Arlington Heights, or in Hammond, Indiana. Nothing, really. And they kept everybody going until 3:30 in the morning for nothing. Pritzker had been talking about trying to centralize control of zoning. Terrible idea. And his program called Build, which wouldn't really do much building. He didn't get a thing on that. He'd been talking, and others in the Dem party, about they got to do something on data centers to control how much energy they would absorb instead of increasing energy as they should, drill baby drill. They didn't do a damn thing on that. Effing failure, complete,
Well, the other thing is we can just go down the line. Illinois has any number of problems. We'll hear about some of those. But, I mean, look at what's going on in education. We spend an enormous amount of money on K through 12 education, and we have kids across the board who can't read at grade level, can't do math at grade level. When you frankly look at a lot of these kids who are getting high school diplomas, they're virtually illiterate. And, if I have long said, if we had defense contractors giving us the quality of product that our education system is giving us, we would be suing the defense contractors for taking money from the taxpayers and then not producing the results they were hired to do. We haven't addressed any of that. We didn't even have a serious conversation about it. So I'll take what you said and agree with you that this was largely a wasted effort with the inability politically to face the problems that the state actually has.
It's symbolic. It's his last year, Pritzker, of his second term, and he wants a third term. So in 8 years, nothing, as you say, nothing to fix or even talk about education. He's never said what WirePoints has written about, and Illinois Policy Institute has written about constantly, the low percentage of kids across the state of Illinois who can read at grade level. At best, of the 2 million public school students, at best 40% read at grade level. But it's in many areas of Illinois, it's much less. In Chicago, minorities at best read at 25% at grade level for Hispanics and blacks. Similar in Bloomington and Peoria and Decatur. He's never once, somebody wants to show me how he's talked about that? He's talked about how well Illinois is doing because they're number 5 essentially in spending, okay? That's not good. He's never really addressed crime. Nationally, it's gotten better, so it's gotten better in Chicago and Illinois, but it's still way too high. We're an outlier relative to other big cities and other areas around the country. And jobs, we're doing terrible. Doesn't address really anything on that. Illegal immigration, the high cost, what we're devoting to that relative to other activities, doesn't address anything on that. Never addressed the $250 billion of pensions and unfunded debt.
Like $260 billion unfunded liability. Let me also bring up a graphic just because we can get lost in the numbers, but this kind of illustrates what we see here. And it's the years before Pritzker. The Pritzker years are in blue. And look at state spending, where you see in the gray it says a baseline of approximately $35 billion for state funding over 8 years. And then Pritzker comes in and kaboom. Now, To be fair to Governor Pritzker, we had, when he first became governor, the COVID years, and there was exceptional spending that one had to do that you normally wouldn't have done. But the problem is, as COVID went away, and we can see here, we didn't cut back on spending. As you and I know, one of the reasons why we have some of the drivers that really the governor can't change is the rising cost of pensions that keep going up. So that, I'm trying to be fair to the governor here, but there's other things where you can bring in more state revenues without raising taxes if you grow the economy. And that's what states like Texas and Florida and Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee have all demonstrated, that they grow their economy, it expands at a rapid pace, you have more people working and they're paying taxes, and the businesses making more profits pay taxes. And when you keep adding tax burdens, one on top of another, with new fees, new regulations, new taxes for this, you drive up the cost of electricity. These are all inhibitors to growth. So unless you have something else, I'm going to want to bring up the governor so he can have a bite here, and not to be beating up him. We'll let the governor have a say on what he thinks he's done right. Do you have anything before we play that clip?
No, go to it.
Responsible budgeting in Illinois is now the rule, not the exception. As a result, Illinois now finds itself in the strongest financial position in decades. 10 consecutive credit rating upgrades. Our $8 billion overdue bill backlog has been paid. $12 billion of short-term debt has been eliminated. Our pension funded ratio is the highest it's been in 17 years. And our rainy day fund has grown from near zero to over $2.4 billion. Discretionary spending in FY27 is roughly flat compared to FY26. Excluding required increases in pension funding and EBF since 2019, our budget has increased at less than the rate of inflation since I took office.
So Jeff, according to the governor, he's made historic changes that have really helped turn the state around financially. And now, I will say he has done some things, but I don't know that everything's quite as rosy as he's trying to paint. What is your take?
Well, of course not. Of course not. He says a responsible budget. You know, if you look at the folks at Truth in Accounting, they tell us every year it's not a balanced budget, because it doesn't look at the actuarial amount that's required to put in. It just says what's statutorily required, and he has done that, I think. But there are $4 or $5 billion that should be put into pensions if you want to get the actuarial amount right, and he doesn't do it. He's not doing any reforms. He's just raised the amount we spend, and that's what he does. No reforms in education, no reforms in job growth. He just spends more, and he looks at inputs, not outputs. We'll see how he runs when he runs for president. We'll see what his competitors in the presidential run. I mean, really, Bailey's not doing the job. He's got to really do more of what we're doing right here if he wants to run effectively against Governor Pritzker. Okay, but the presidential opponents in the Democratic Party, I think they'll do a better job of hitting on these main points. You got to hammer, and you got to say what you would do better, Darren Bailey. And I think the presidential opponents from the other states will do that, and they should, because you know when he says a responsible budget, it's not responsible. It's not balanced.
Let me bring in something. This morning, June 5, we got the employment jobs report for the month of May, and where 85,000 jobs were estimated to be created, we see that in the Trump economy here, it's 172,000 jobs. Twice as many jobs were created as were estimated, with unemployment, as you see there, at 4.3%. And I wanted to say that because we're going to play a couple of clips here from what the Illinois Senate Republicans were saying about this. And they point out that job growth in Illinois lags other states. So let's take a listen to what John Curran, the Senate Republican leader, had to say.
Instead of opening the lines of communication to seek further investment in Illinois, ensure monies are flowing into our state, this administration has publicly said that they refuse to even communicate with the president's administration. Instead of passing on the federal tax breaks that businesses and taxpayers in every other state are going to get the benefit of, Democrats and the governor in Illinois seek to decouple us from those federal tax breaks, further punishing our businesses and our taxpayers here in Illinois. These are serious revenue issues that are being discussed and unfortunately are breaking against Illinois taxpayers and businesses.
So there you go. And I want to explain for the viewers, because what this decoupling mean, that's rather confusing term. But basically, in the big, beautiful bill that was passed last year at the federal level, they were giving various incentives to grow the economy to investors, to businesses. One of those is just one example, was the accelerated depreciation. And so that applied to plants and equipment, new plants and equipment. If you are someone who's in construction, if you're in some manufacturing process, you're making your products through equipment. That equipment over time is going to break down, and so you have to go out and buy a new one. If you have to take deductions for that equipment that might cost you $100,000 or more, and you have to spread that over 10 years, that's one thing. What the big, beautiful bill last year did at the federal level is that it allowed businesses to deduct the entire cost of new plant and equipment in 1 year, which makes it far more affordable to invest in new plants and equipment. That helps spur future growth, future job creation. And what the Republicans are talking about is that the state of Illinois, Pritzker doesn't want to give those tax deductions to Illinois businesses. And that just means it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. If we, as they say, decouple, that means not apply those tax deductions. They would still be applied at the federal level, but not at the state level for tax deductions.
Well, Governor Pritzker is allergic to the word reform. He cannot do it. So if you have a reform going on in the federal government, where they do have accelerated depreciation, as you've just spoken of, and what that means in terms of job growth, he doesn't seem to want the 1.5 million job growth that occurred in Florida, or the 1 million job growth that occurred in Texas, or the 800,000 or so in Tennessee. Those numbers may be a little bit off, but Pritzker's talking about in 8 years, 15,000 or 20,000 new jobs, not millions, not 1.5 million. And this is one way where you get more job growth and you don't. And he talks about what he spends on education, but we have in the same big, beautiful bill, there was the option for states to opt in and have school choice. Other states, even Susana Mendoza, who announced she's running for mayor in Chicago this week, she's for the opt-in to have school choice here in Illinois, but not Governor Pritzker. He's still thinking it over. He's allergic to reform, whether it's school choice, whether it's lower taxes. And he keeps touting, as he did earlier in the clip we played, the consecutive upgrades. Well, rating agencies rate you. Do you keep raising taxes? For their concern, you can do all the spending you want as long as you keep raising taxes. That's not good. You should be cutting spending. That's how you balance the budget, not by raising taxes. So Pritzker, again, won't reform. He won't do it economically for job growth, won't do it to reduce crime, won't do it to reduce taxes, won't do it to fix the illegal immigration problem, won't do it to fix pensions. He's allergic to reform.
And here's the thing. The mark of a leader is you have to be flexible. You can't just be an ideologue. There are going to be some principles that you have to stand by through thick or thin. But you don't want to be a stick in the mud. And as a governor or any kind of a leader, you take over a failing business, you have to make changes. Pritzker made some changes when he first came in. But there are so many more problems that still need to be addressed that are not, as we said earlier, not being addressed. Before we leave this topic, I want to go. Let's give John Curran, Republican leader in the Illinois Senate, another bite here as he went further.
Every single neighboring state is outpacing us in economic growth and employment numbers. The spending is growing, the taxes are growing, the economy in Illinois is not keeping pace. Illinois continues to have the highest unemployment rate in the Midwest, as you heard from Senator Rose. And our economic growth, our GDP growth lags every Midwestern state. We're bottom 5 in the country on economic growth under Governor Pritzker, and we're bottom 5 in the country on jobs, unemployment.
So, as you just heard John Curran say, the state is failing to grow at the same pace as other states in the Midwest, and that's not an accident. Illinois has the Mississippi, the Ohio, we've got the best farmland, we have Chicago. This should be a exploding economy, and instead it is the state of Illinois, the economy is held back with the equivalent of duct tape because of all the regulations, all the new taxes, all the costs going up, and this inhibits growth. So I think that is going to be, Jeff, a major economic issue that those Republicans out there ought to adapt and point out because the facts are on their side on this.
Taxes growing, highest gas taxes you can think of. And they slowed it down a little bit this time, and because they're not recognized because gas prices were relatively high. But we have the highest property taxes in the country, probably the second highest, or maybe the highest overall total of state and local taxes. You got to hammer that. The House GOP minority leader McComey has to hammer that. I don't even know where the caucus is, or even Curran saying that. But is he saying that the whole Senate caucus, the whole Senate Republican caucus, came out and spoke about the $800 million increase in taxes that were in this budget? I didn't hear that. They did talk about that. I mean, and the House Republicans. We only have obviously so much time. If we were doing an hour and a half show, we could have a lot more bites from other people. But that said, we'll follow up as the week goes on. Let's move along to the other big story of the week, and that is the elections in California. And why do we cover that? What used to be said is, as California goes, so goes the nation. And as anyone knows who follows politics, California has been a deep blue state for the last 20 years with basically, kind of like Illinois, with the Republicans locked out of power. But in the primary they just had this week, we have here now, we can see both in the governor's race, surprisingly, Steve Hilton, the Republican, leads. And this is a weird election because it's the two top people. If you don't make it to 50%, then you have a runoff. And so right now, there is no 50% winner in the governor's race. Hilton, as we see, leads with about 60% of the vote counted and 101.5 million votes for Hilton, 1.47 for Javier Becerra, the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, as I recall. And then the billionaire Tom Steyer is in third place. Likely he will not move forward, but it does look like Javier Becerra, a Democrat, and Steve Hilton, a Republican. So a Republican will be in the race. Now, Jeff, you grew up in Los Angeles. I want to talk about the Los Angeles race as well, but before we do that, give me your thoughts on what you think as far as what's going on in the governor's race out there. Well, California is plagued as a blue state by many of the same problems that Illinois is plagued as a blue state. They didn't even go into that much in this campaign. There's so much wrong with it. They have similar pathologies in terms of how they handle crime in general across the state of California. Similar, very high taxes, similar waste, as we'll see maybe in other clips about, when they expend on so-called, high-speed rail, they waste it and they don't build anything. So there's lots to criticize, and in general, it's an over-regulated, messy state. They need to do more to deal with their homeless problem as opposed to just spending with it. It's mainly a drug problem, as we're seeing in Los Angeles. and they don't deal with it. So Hilton's done a nice job as a refreshing Republican free market voice. And he's been rewarded in this race because he's leading with 27%.
Let me bring up the, let's get to the mayor's race here, because we see, hang on one second, go ahead.
One minute. So the point to remember here, these numbers are with about 60% counted, and they're still, and he's got.
And by the way, today is Friday as we tape this, and the election was Tuesday, and we knew Trump won on election night, but here California is not even at 75% of the votes counted yet, and it's been about 4 days.
Well, they mail out to every registered voter, which is millions across the state of California. They mail out a ballot. And of course, many are not going to be returned, but the great majority of voting, I think it's more than 90% of the votes are mail.
All right.
But let me just tell our viewers that yes, Hilton is leading now, with probably my estimate, more than 1 million votes left. His lead to be at least the number two, his lead over Steyer is only, I think, about 400,000 votes. Steyer can't make that up. It'd be hard. But right now, I think, Hilton's in a good position, but he still could end up being number three.
Let me tell you that. Look, government is a system of systems.
Let me finish the sentence. Excuse me. Let me finish the sentence. Which would mean if he's number three, he's not in the runoff in November. If he's number two, he will be in the runoff. I think people got that. And you'll have a real choice.
Government is a system of systems, and what we see in California is a series of broken systems, including their election system. The state of California is a national embarrassment that they can't count their votes in the way they're doing this, and it's ridiculous, and that's another thing that ought to be addressed. Now, when we look at the count in LA mayor's race, Karen Bass, former congresswoman, she's running for re-election, 195,000 votes. She will be one of the candidates. The question now is, will Spencer Pratt, who frankly it's open question. Republicans have embraced him, but I think he actually says, I'm an independent. So he is running for political office for the first time. He has 163,000 votes, 33,000 more than Miss Rahman. I'm not sure how to pronounce her first name there, but we shall see. And speaking of California elections, if Pratt is kicked out, if Steve Hilton were to be kicked out because of a bunch of mail-in ballots that come in, this is going to be more undermining the credibility of American elections. And I suspect there would be a federal investigation at this point, and there probably should be, because this is just a broken system out there, and it's a ridiculous way to run an election.
Well, let's just remind people again, for Pratt to be on the ballot in November, to give him a choice between Bass and Pratt, he's got to be in the runoff. He's got to be one or two. Right now he's two. If Nithya, what's your last name, Terry?
Rahman.
Rahman. If Nithya Rahman, if she were to catch him, and she could, well, then they don't really have a choice. She's a Democratic city councilman. She's probably as progressive, so to speak, as Karen Bass. So right now, Pratt's leaving by about 30,000 votes, and there's still quite a bit to come in yet. And remember, folks, this is the Republican registration in California, whether it's the city or the state, is like 15 to 20%. So really, Pratt's more an independent, but it's heavily skewed toward Democrats. So we'll see what happens in the next week or two as to whether Pratt and his reforms are there.
Let me bring something up here. When I'm going to bring up this, we have these, look at the numbers. LA County is a massively large county, and yet we see very few votes here. And when you look at the votes, 163,000 for Pratt. From the reports I have heard, there are something like a million Republicans who are registered vote. What you're saying is Republicans are so discouraged by bothering to vote in California these days. There's a lot of Republican voters that just didn't bother to go out. We're going to have to see if Pratt makes it into the runoff in November. then allow those Republicans have to come out. Here's something that might encourage them, because this is the frustration. This is by a commentator, Ashton Cohen, I should say. He is an attorney and a commentator, and he posted this on Facebook, which I thought was interesting, commenting on what's going on in California.
Sure, if Spencer Pratt can become mayor or if Steve Hilton can be governor, but something is changing when even my most liberal friends now acknowledge how insanely corrupt California is. We've become the laughingstock of the country. And just look at the three biggest scams going on right now. First, you have the high-speed rail. In 2008, they told us it would cost $8 billion and be done by 2020. It's now 2026. They've burned through $20 billion, and there's not a single mile of track laid. All of it stolen. The way it works, the Democratic machine takes taxpayer money, hands it to their contractor friends, the contractors pocket the money, then kick some of it back to the same politicians so they can stay in power. It's one big, beautiful, broad flywheel. And it's the same story with homelessness. California spent $24 billion in 5 years, and the homeless population went up. The money went to developers, consultants, nonprofits, who again pocket the money and then hand some of it back to the same politicians who gave them the money. And then you get to the fires. Thousands of homes burned down because these morons refused to clear dead vegetation while reservoirs sat empty and fire hydrants had no water. Well-meaning people, myself included, donated hundreds of millions of dollars collectively to help the fire victims, and not a single dollar went to anybody who lost their home. All of the money stolen went to the same NGOs. So will enough people wake up this time? I don't know. Maybe it'll take a few more disasters for people to finally see the light. I guess we'll see what happens. You know, I'm not.
So there he is, Ashton Cohen, attorney, and that was on his Facebook page if you want to see more of his commentary. But I thought it was a long bite, Jeff, but I thought it was pretty interesting, and he nailed down a lot of the failures over the years of California government.
Well, he did, and again, the key word is reform, and Pratt really caught the mood, because we saw nationally how poorly the Bass handled the fires and how much worse the destruction was because of her incompetence in leading up to the fires and then the handling. And so that was just one, and also the encampments and the druggies and the open-air drug markets that exist all over the city of LA. And let me remind you, you made a reference to LA County. The mayor's race in Los Angeles is not LA County, it's the city of Los Angeles. So, you know, they're not, right now, he's got a 30,000 vote lead, but that's only with 60% in. They're easily another probably 400,000, 500,000, a large number of votes, I believe, that are still to come in. And again, he's running as an independent, and he's raising these problems. He's doing a good job of doing that. I think he's outspending Bass, you know. So he certainly has the money. He just got to refine, and I think he put out a good message. Now we'll see if the voters reward that and give him a second place. So in November, they have a choice between a Democrat who hasn't performed and a guy, Spencer Pratt, who's come up with some good ideas to reform the way government works.
Maybe next week we will have some results. I want to bring up another big story we don't have time to talk about, that Scott Pelley left. As you can see here, this is breaking news this morning. Leslie Stahl, Bill Whitaker, and Jonathan Wertheimer say they will stay at 60 Minutes, while, as most people know, Scott Pelley was fired from that organization. I also want to say, speaking of the California primary, Jeff, you and I remember it was 58 years ago today that Bobby Kennedy was shot. His son is now Secretary of Health and Human Services, and you and I can agree that we just say what might have been, and there has been for a long time too much violence in American politics. Hopefully that is gone. You got 30 seconds left.
Well, let me just remind people, we've mentioned reform. JFK was a Democrat, but he was a reformer. He said a rising tide lifts all boats. He was for tax cuts. None of the current Democrats are. So I close on that note.
Yeah, he lowered the marginal income tax rate, and guess what? The economy of the 1960s exploded. We'll have to say goodbye, folks. Until next time, thanks for watching.